Hey everyone, welcome back to Workshop Quick Takes. Today I want to show you how you can make an electrical terminal from plumbing supplies if you are in a situation where you need one fast, and especially if it's for large diameter wire that you just can't get on short notice. This obviously isn't a situation for what you should be using for professional handiwork, but if you're trying to, say, repair a car in a difficult situation, maybe you're on the trail or in a remote area, and let's suppose you need a terminal. You might look at one of these professionally manufactured terminals and think, wow, that looks slick, and it is. But fundamentally, all it's really manufactured from is a piece of electrical copper pipe. And then they put it into a special die that crimps it down and drill the hole. And if you look on the side here, you can even see, if you look up real close, kind of see the line there where the two pieces were crimped together. And then, of course, this one's been tin plated with solder, and it has a UL listing and everything else that you need to actually do professional work. Let's suppose you look at a set of cheapies like these that I think I got at Walmart, maybe? These don't look like much because they aren't much. This is about the cheapest way to fabricate an electrical terminal from a piece of copper. And if it looks like they just simply crimped the pipe here, drilled a hole, and then maybe flared the end here, it's because that is all they did. And you can actually do that at home without necessarily using professional tools. And in fact, I can make a better one than this from this scrap piece of 3/8 inch pipe that came off of a project. So let's take a look at how that might be done. First off, we are going to need to crimp an end of it in order to get a terminal. Now, if you have to, you can take a hammer, and you can do that pretty much like that. Although, you'll notice it's not perfect, and the more I mash at this, the more I'm actually going to start mashing the copper out into an unrecognizable mess. So the other way to do it would be to take a similar piece of copper, but put it in a bench vise if you have one. And you get a similar result. Of course, the only problem with that is now that this thing bulges out on both sides, which is why this one here has been bent. It's been bent in order to be able to mate on a flat surface where that might be a problem. But okay, one way or another, you've got what you need, and now you're going to have to cut off the end of this. Now, if you don't have a pipe cutting tool, you could also do it with a hacksaw, because the step we're going to do next is going to fix whatever mashed or rough edge we end up creating by doing this. Okay, so there we go, two terminals of some kind. And then the last step is, we need to be able to get wires in and out of here, and if this is a close diameter to the wire that we're trying to put in there, it's going to catch and fray on the edges. So, before we go to the step of drilling our hole, let's put this in our bench vise and do something interesting. This here is a pair of needle nose pliers. It's made of hardened steel, as you'd expect. Everybody's got a pair of these. So just gently, because I don't want to ruin the terminal, start rotating these in here. Of course, if you have a pipe flaring tool, you probably want to use that instead. But a lot of people don't have a pipe flaring tool, especially not if they're doing something like this. And there you go. So just like that, I created a couple copper terminals. Last step, of course, is going to be to drill a hole in here. Copper is a fairly soft metal, and if you try to start with the largest bit you need, you'll probably make a mess out of it. So regardless of what you do for step 2, for step 1, I highly recommend taking a small bit and doing your initial hole. And if you do have a bench vise, it'll make this step easier because you don't want to apply a lot of pressure. You just want to hold it in place so it doesn't twist. So there's the pilot hole. Okay, don't do what I just did. One of those burrs had a very sharp edge on it. Step 2 is then a larger bit. Again, you don't want to step up a ridiculous amount of sizes. You just want to keep working the hole out until it gets to the final size. And let's suppose for some reason I want to put a 1/4 inch stud through this, so I'm going to go one size larger at 5/16 and double check, make sure that's not going to make my tongue ridiculously thin, which looks like it'll work. Yeah, see, we've already got it almost too big there. I might need to step that one 2 more sizes. Nope, got it. That one there actually started to tear out. So what I'm going to do is get my side cutters again, crimp off some of that waste, and then repress this in the vise. And then because my hole's messed up now, I'm going to clean that one more time. There we go. For the last step, take a very large bit and just knock the burrs off of that. And that one there twisted a little bit too. We'll just use that one with the hammer to show that it works the same either way. Now, if you have one, a Christmas tree bit would make this a little more clean and efficient, but not everybody has a Christmas tree bit. And so I want to show how to just do it by stepping regular drill bits. Now I've been using this small lightweight hammer for this. Obviously a bigger hammer will do the trick, but the bigger the hammer that you use, the more force you apply and the more likely you are to just mash the copper out rather than flattening it. So there we are, a pair of hacked together terminals that are easily as good as the cheap commercially bought ones. Obviously nowhere near as nice as a high quality one, but if you don't have access to this or this on short notice and you just need to get something working together again, and it's not going to be subject to a code inspection, very important because these are obviously not listed terminals, but for say automotive work in particular, this is a suitable application. Let's suppose you need to corrosion protect it like I did on this one. How are you going to do that? Well, again, since we're talking plumbing supplies, why not a plumbing torch? But keep in mind that the hotter you get this, the more you can mess up the physical characteristics of the copper and put a lot of corrosion on it instead of putting a nice solder cover on it. The other thing to consider is that if you're thinking about working with plumbing solder, don't. Plumbing solder contains etching acids, which can actually damage electrical connections later if you don't get them completely out of the material. So if you have electrical solder, this is highly preferred. We don't want a super hot flame, so we're going to keep this fairly low, but we do want a little bit more heat than what this guy can really provide. Once you've got this nice and hot and still liquid, you can actually move it around with something that won't bond to it easily, like a steel screwdriver. That is a cheap and cheerful tin-plated copper terminal, which you could use for temporary wiring or on low voltage where you're not subject to code requirements or inspections. You might even be able to use it permanently. Old farmer's trick, I assume. I don't know who else would have done it first, but that's how you can make a basic electrical terminal out of plumbing supplies. As a final exercise, let's see what happens when we terminate wires into one of these terminals. And in keeping with the spirit of this, let's use the ultra cheap wire crimpers. There's a little section here called ignition terminal, and we'll just try and crimp a couple 8-gauge wires into one of these and see what happens. One thing to note when using a tool of this sort is that you generally need to go up and down the terminal a couple times or 3 in order to get a solid crimp. However, you do still want to check and make sure nothing is going to pull out afterwards, and that might require applying a decent amount of force to the terminal. And in this case, we didn't quite get it. Now you could try to ream-open that terminal and re-crimp it. However, usually at that point the copper will be weaker, so let's just pick up the other one and see if we can get this one a little more solid, again using cheap tools. We are still going to start with the same crimping tool, and then we will add a little bit of an additional punch using a screwdriver. Although a carpenter center punch or any other type of blunt tool would also do the trick. This time it really is holding, and that's important because if you can pull the cable out with your bare hands, chances are good you're going to get a resistive connection in there sooner or later. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again on Workshop Quick Takes. I hope that proved useful to you in some way. Maybe it was just interesting like it was to me. I wanted to always try that and see how it worked. But who knows, maybe you'll end up in a situation where you've got some plumbing supplies kicking around and you need to turn them into electrical supplies. And In some cases, it is possible. But again, make sure that what you're doing is legal in your jurisdiction, meets code if there are code requirements and so forth, because homemade devices tend to be frowned upon if there's a code inspector involved. So, see you next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?